Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Technology, Media, and Telecom at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about cloud and markets and what's happened with cloud with returning guest, Research Director Melanie Posey. Melanie, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Eric. Glad to be here and always a pleasure.
Great to have you back. And with everything that's been going on at the beginning of the year, I wanted to get back to really figuring out where we are in this next stage of what had been that wonderfully buzzy area of cloud. And I guess maybe hang the question out there, when will we start transitioning to conversations about infrastructure more broadly and stop talking about cloud as a thing? I mean, do we still need to be treating cloud as its own special thing?
Actually, that is a great question, Eric. And I think we've passed the stage of cloud as a thing because when you think about it, cloud is entering its third decade right now. So 2006, when S3 first came out, that was the 2000s, then the 2000 teens, and now we're in the 2020s. So, we've got nearly 3 decades of cloud. So I think it is time to stop thinking about it as this very buzzy new thing. And I found a quote which I find really apropos to where we are right now in cloud. This gentleman who is the vice provost for AI and educational technology policy at NYU said this with regard to communications technology, but it applies to cloud as well. And what he said was, once tech gets boring, the social effects get interesting. And not that cloud technology is boring necessarily, but it has been baked into the cake as far as infrastructure options. And I think in a broad sense, that's where we are now. Cloud is a way of doing things, not necessarily a thing itself. And it's a modality that infrastructure uses to get the resources to the folks to do their thing. And the thing that they're doing mostly right now is digital transformation and IT modernization. So where we are right now is cloud is an option among many. And the interesting thing about this third decade of cloud is cloud just doesn't mean the hyperscalers, AWS and Azure and GCP and the whole gang. Cloudiness has also moved out of the hyperscalers' data centers and into corporate data centers, into third-party colocation facilities, and out to the edge. And edge computing is a big, big topic right now, primarily related to the moment that, generative AI, Gen AI, machine learning, and some other very data heavy, latency sensitive applications that organizations are adopting. And that is actually an application or workload that happens in multiple places at the same time, kind of here, there, and everywhere, to quote the Beatles.
All right. So I'm confused. Has cloud basically grown up, moved out to the suburbs, gotten a dog, and gotten boring? Or is it doing the fancy stuff with generative AI and being hip and happening, where it sounds like you're talking about two different angles around cloud, or is it really all of the above?
It is actually all of the above. And it's really useful to think about it as cloud having two personas right now, because I personally have not moved out to the suburbs. I still live in the city, but I have friends who have moved to the suburbs, and every now and again, they still come into the city and we hang out like we did when we were 20 years old. So this is sort of what's happening in cloud too. The infrastructure is the foundation of all of these cool new things that are happening right now with Gen AI, and Edge is an additional venue where some of those cool things happen. And at the same time, things are happening in the infrastructure side of things as well. To power Gen AI, you need very high powered chips, the GPUs, and some organizations or some vendors now are talking about DPUs as well, special chips for data processing, so data processing units. So things are still happening in an infrastructure. So the suburbs has clubs and bars and things like that too, where you can go out and have fun. But on the other side of things, what people are doing on top of cloud is extremely interesting. And what ends up happening as cloud grows up, it's not just about infrastructure anymore. In a way, infrastructure becomes the platform or the enabler for all the cool new stuff people are doing. And as part of that kind of beyond infrastructure, like it's not just the infrastructure, it's what you do on top of it shift. We're seeing some shifts in the way what I like to call the cloudverse operates, where there's always been an element of you get together and you do partnering to create new solutions. But I would say in the past 12, 18 months or so, what we've seen from the hyperscalers is more of an all in approach to partners, that cloud platforms, in some sense, are becoming the locus of IT in the sense that when you need big iron, big guns to power big applications, you go to the cloud. But those applications don't just happen in centralized hyperscale data centers. So you need partners to help get things out to the edge. And also, the solutions that are being built on top of that cloud infrastructure are not necessarily coming from the hyperscalers. In some cases, they are, but you've got ISVs and the global systems integrators who are also throwing in with the cloud providers in the sense that let's build stuff on their platforms for our customers and let's see some magic happen.
So it sounds like my analogy has really totally broken down. The suburbs thing seemed like a good idea, but it sounds like there really is this, this multifaceted aspect of it. And what you're describing, on the one hand, there's the boring part. There are all those issues of, hey, cloud has now become a relatively well-known thing, although I'll make the point that maybe there are folks out there that are still wrestling with basic cloud things like figuring out how to effectively turn things off and a lot of the other
Mhm.
cloud pattern things that are important. But the other thing that you called out, which I think is the really important part, is that cloud is the place where you can rapidly get access to the latest technologies at relatively low cost. And so when you start talking about generative AI or pick your next new important thing, if you need the latest and greatest in terms of high performance silicon or cool capabilities or massive amounts of data, that cloud is where you can get access to that. And maybe there are things that are good about the immediate access. Maybe there are some cost concerns about what you do long term. Maybe there's some concerns about where your data lives. A set of things that you can manage, but that really you have this duality of all things cloud that get rolled up, and this community that is evolving outside of it. And whether or not that's the cloudy multiverse or wherever we go with that, this has now become this next stage of, to your point, from the quote, it's gotten kind of boring. And now the interesting things are happening with the building these ecosystems.
Absolutely. And this is not to say that people have figured out all the ins and outs of the infrastructure. I would posit an analogy here around smartphones. That when we first got smartphones in 2007, 2008, it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now it's become just part of our lives and it's been incorporated into the day to day. And that's what I see happening with cloud infrastructure as well. But this is not to say that on the iPhone front that we don't drop our phones, we don't accidentally erase all of our data, that like stuff still happens, right? So I think part of the continued maturation process is coming from organizations who are using cloud. You mentioned how to keep costs under control. And that's led to this whole area that's popped up seemingly out of nowhere, but not really, called FinOps, financial operations, as a way to, in a programmatic kind of way, track cloud costs, do reporting and analytics on your cloud costs, have a software engine essentially give you recommendations or where you could save money, where you can improve performance. And I guess we used to call this application performance management, but that whole cost optimization piece has been rolled into just the general framework of how do you manage cloud resources. And as hybrid and multi cloud continues to become just the way things are done, it sort of gets rolled into what I guess you could call Uber management planes that are a control plane for all your resources, not just on the cloud or not just on prem. So there still are exciting things happening in infrastructure, and those all boil down to automation and integration. So there's still work to be done on that infrastructure front, but it's very connected now to how people are using cloud infrastructure and what they're doing on top of it, which makes FinOps and unified control planes even more important because serious, real business. And we don't have numbers on this, but the percentage of the economy that runs on the cloud, it's a big number.
That actually is a really interesting point. The evolution, and I think we can identify fairly rapid advance of FinOps as a discipline is really a sign of maturity in terms of how people are consuming cloud capabilities. Because to your point, it means that, oh, people actually are spending enough money to now worry about how it's being spent, where it's being spent, and the fact that now there's enough budget going there. It's something where in the past, we didn't have to do the same kind of planning because infrastructure was a capitalized asset and we bought it and then we ran it until it died or depreciated and then we were done with it. Yet when we shifted to clouds, suddenly it's an operating expense. And now we've got to have the same kind of financial discipline that we apply to any other operating expense, like travel and budgets and other kinds of things that we've had tools to manage from the interior business side. We've now got to start applying those same tools to our infrastructure because
Exactly.
we spend the same way on them.
Exactly. And that's one thing that, I've noted as well is with the emergence of FinOps as a discipline, what you're starting to see is kind of this long awaited alignment or increased collaboration between the IT operations side of the house and the C suite CFO side of the house as well. And the very interesting thing is, I attended the FinOps Foundation's event at the end of June, and I met a lot of practitioners there who were both IT people and finance people, some people who were just IT, some people were just finance. So, to your point, about the shift from OPEX to CAPEX, what that means is there's a shift in the way IT is thought of within organizations. And, it's not just about the IT department anymore. And especially since so many business critical workloads, both sort of internal facing and external facing, front, back, and middle office, if you will, are running on this cloud infrastructure too. So everybody's got skin in the game now.
The maturity piece is that people have realized that you can actually manage spend in a way that you couldn't in a capitalized asset world. Now you've got the ability to have something that's more flexible and, in fact, has levers that you can pull to figure out how much does it cost you, where do you put things, the rest of it. Again, an interesting step in the maturity process. Although I also want to talk about, you mentioned multi-cloud. The thing, it was really interesting back in the early days of cloud, we had major companies saying that they were all in on cloud and they were going to go all with one vendor, and everything that they needed for infrastructure was going to be right there in that one cloud. And then it turned out that there were lots of clouds, and we still had people sort of saying, well, we're going to focus on one cloud. And now we're in a world in which everybody's got a bunch of clouds.
Well, right, exactly. And I think that's a function of responsibility and interest and usage of the public cloud infrastructure actually happening across the organization, right?
And something where if we think about how they're actually leveraging it, there are lots of different use cases for lots of different things. And I think much the way we thought about buying IT historically, there was always that thought of, oh, well, we'll just pick one vendor and they'll give us everything we need. And of course, that didn't really work out well,
Well,
or it didn't work out
exactly.
practically.
Right, exactly. And to a certain extent, the multi-cloudiness of organizations' IT environment right now is kind of a function of developers who were tasked with coming up with this or that application. Their preferred platform happened to be X, Y, or Z because it had tools and languages that they liked. So some of it was a function of there were lots of people in an organization using cloud and doing different things as their job role. So people gravitated to what they felt most comfortable with. But also, in some sense, it's not entirely different from the situation we had in the pre cloud era, where if you went into a data center, in some cases, maybe you had the whole kit from company X, Y, or Z. But especially on the server side, you'll see a lot of different kinds of servers and also a lot of different types of storage. So, in a way, heterogeneous IT is not a new thing, and cloud is just kind of a continuation of that.
Yeah, so we bought everything from this one vendor. Well, so what about that mainframe that's sitting over there? Oh, yeah, that's really critical too. And what about those big storage arrays? Oh, yeah, they're from somebody else, but yeah, they're critical too.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like the right tool for the right job at the right time is where we've gotten to in terms of organizations' IT estates. And it's a similar thing. Like I fancy myself a photographer, so I have about four cameras and I use each camera for something different.
Well, and we also are in that world in which, much in the same way we had vendor relationships, if you have a merger, acquisition, a spinoff, whatever your financial event is, you may then all of a sudden find yourself with new relationships and new vendors that are driving you. And maybe in fact that your ecosystem is set up so that hey, your marketing statistics company actually runs best on one provider, but you've been existing on the other provider. So we've got a lot of different things that are pulling us into an environment that is becoming just by default multi-cloud.
Exactly, exactly. And I would say that probably the environments have become multi cloud by default, but going forward, you need to have some design and structure to the whole thing as well. So I think the sort of combined effect of unified control planes and FinOps and cost optimization is one thing that helps you get to that multi-cloud by design and basically handle all of the complexity because you can see everything. You have a single point of visibility, I suppose, to figure out what's going on. And I'd like to make another point here is that we're getting to a point where, I won't say that cloud growth is slowing down because it's not when you look at things on the revenue side. But when you look at some of the hyperscalers, and much has been made of this, that their growth rates are slowing. And to a certain extent, it's the law of large numbers. But what the market is starting to realize is that, the gold rush of everybody moving to cloud for the first time, that's kind of in the rear view mirror now, given that we're in the third decade of cloud. So, what is happening, and in another sign of the maturity of the market, there's a lot more thinking, a lot more partnership, a lot more collaboration around, we have this fantastic platform. What do we do with it? What do we do on top of it? How do we drive the usage of it forward in a way that keeps the market growing and also gives organizations what they need in terms of agility, flexibility, and also options and choices to keep that momentum going. And I think that's where we are right now. We have this great new thing. Ooh, what else can we do with it?
It sounds like we're getting back to the origin of that quote. It got boring, and now we're doing interesting things.
Right. And boring in this sense means it works. People are okay with it. Maybe not public cloud for every single workload that's out there, but it has its place in the universe of enterprise IT solutions. And I just want to hark back to this kind of framework I set up for a presentation I did years ago. It was about the theme of it was the 5 stages of grief and how organizations came to terms with public cloud and the whole thing about negotiation, bargaining, and how you finally get to acceptance. That's where we are right now.
And it sounds like what that also means is that my now oft repeated question of when are we going to stop talking about cloud? We're still going to be talking about cloud as a thing for a while. And maybe not the surprising, fancy, new, shiny thing it was some time back, but still something that looks like cloud.
We're still going to be talking about it for quite a long time because it's always going to be there because in a lot of ways public cloud infrastructure or just the cloud way of doing things is pretty much the foundation or the platform for digital transformation, which is another one of those things people don't really talk about it all that much anymore because it's kind of been absorbed into the bloodstream of every organization, particularly post COVID, if I can say that we're post COVID, that this is how things are done. This is how business gets done. This is how commerce, communications gets done digitally. And public cloud platforms are a big part of that digital enablement.
So, more cloud conversations to come. And speaking of which, you're going to be talking about cloud at our Hosting and Cloud Transformation Summit that will be coming up in October. I wanted to give you a shout out for that coming up.
Yes, I will be speaking about that, and I will continue on with some of these themes about where are we with cloud right now to kick off the event, where during that event, we'll be talking about some of these things that are happening on top of cloud, particularly Gen AI and what's happening on the edge, and also what's happening with the cloudy multiverse, which I'm going to steal that one, Eric.
Go for
And
it.
how the cloudy multiverse is changing how organizations interact with technology, and how the technology vendors increasingly are interacting with each other.
And it's going to be happening in your backyard, right there in New York.
Right here in New York City, where I will always live and refuse to move to the suburbs.
And not get a dog. Well, with that, I mean, there are so many other things to talk about, but maybe this is a place to continue these conversations on another episode, thinking that we've got some more talking to do about a lot of what's happening in sort of the cutting edge of that we'll be covering a few episodes out. So we'll have to continue the conversation then, but we are at time for today. Thanks for being back.
Thank you, and look forward to seeing all y'all in New York City at our HCTS event.
October 10th, and we'll have a link in the show notes to point people in that direction. And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us, and thanks to our production team, including Carolyn Wright and Ethan Zimmon on the marketing and events teams, and our agency partner, the 199. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be taking a look at the M&A markets, mergers and acquisitions, and how things have unfolded in a strange year for the markets in general, but interesting turns in the M&A world as well. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.